Good afternoon, everyone. The highlight of this conference will be the last plenary today. The title will be a UK perspective on assuring patient safety and professional competence. And this plenary will be delivered by Professor Trudy Roberts. May I introduce to you, if you have not already known her, Trudy graduated from Manchester with a degree in medicine and Bachelor of Science in Anatomy. The CV did not mention which year. In 2000, she was appointed Professor of Medical Education at the University of Leeds. She was awarded a National Teaching Fellowship in 2006, and she's a council member of the General Medical Council from 2009 until 2012. And she's the chair of the Association of the Study of Medical Education until 2013. In September 2013, she took over as president of the Association for Medical Education in Europe. Her main interests and expertise are in the areas of assessment of competence, professionalism, and transitions. A bit on her personal info, she's married to a surgeon. It's always good to be married to a surgeon because they will probably know you inside out. Has 2 children and she dreams of owning a Subaru WRX. Trudy.
Thank you very much. I think it's as well I don't tell you which year I graduated. The only thing I would say, there's been new diseases that have come up since I first graduated, so that tells you how long ago it was. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be asked to give the final plenary for this meeting. I always like, as people know, coming to IMU. I go away and have to increase my gym membership and go on a diet because of all the food you give me. I thought what I would do is I would going to talk about first do no harm, which I think Charles, I don't know where he is, if he's here now, talked about earlier on today. But as everybody's been talking about their own institutions, I thought I'd just take a moment to tell you about Leeds. I think this is because when we did the Aspire workshop, Q asked me why we hung sheep in Yorkshire. Yorkshire, as people know from the UK, is God's own county. We let very few people in, and we don't let anybody out. So let me just explain. This is the logo of the School of Medicine. These are the white roses of Yorkshire. For those of you who perhaps know a bit more about me, that although I work on the work on the Russian side of the Pennines, those are the hills that run down the centre of the UK, I actually live on the US side of the Pennines, but the border is less onerous than it was. Lancashire has red roses and Yorkshire has these white roses. This, of course, is the snake associated with medicine, and actually we don't abuse sheep. Unlike the Welsh. This is a sheep that's being weighed for the amount of coat that it's wearing, because Yorkshire, and Leeds in particular, is a great woolen, had a great woolen industry. This is where we are, in the centre really of the UK, and we are not as isolated as people think. So what's Leeds look like? Well, we don't have quite the skyline that you have here in Kuala Lumpur, but this is Leeds at night. And we do have some very nice areas within Leeds itself. So if you ever come to visit Leeds, please come along. But even more importantly than Leeds, the city itself, Leeds is surrounded by an area of outstanding natural beauty. So this is, you can see the surroundings, the Yorkshire Dales, if you ever come up to Leeds. So if you did want to come to Leeds, we would welcome you, and this is the sort of environment you'll be working in. So this is the School of Medicine, and the university. This is the university. The university is slightly younger than the School of Medicine. In 2031, the School of Medicine will be 200 years old, and we're already planning for a lot of activities. So just slightly older than your 25 years, but not that much. This is the School of Medicine. It's been described as a fascist cube by Damien Hirst, or a temple to the dead. I wasn't quite certain whether he was referring to the the contents of the anatomy department or the staff when he said that. But it's an interesting building. So let's go back to what I was asked to speak about, and I think what I need to just talk to you just a moment about is what is this problem? What is the problem that we're trying to address here? And it's encompassed by these two slides. It is about doing no harm to those people who come and seek our help, the young and the old and the vulnerable. What is it that they come for? They come for help, and they have a right, I think, to be given the best possible care that we can. Now that can fall down, and we'll talk about this shortly. So is this problem about medical mistakes or care or poor graduates new? Well, some of you may or may not know this, that this man was the first medical educationalist. This is James Paget, and James Paget, a famous British physician who has several diseases named after him. But what a lot of people don't know is that he wrote the first paper on medical education. And this was published in 1869, and it was entitled, "What Becomes of Medical Students?" So I thought you would quite like to see what his results were. This was a cohort study of 1,000 students over 30 years. So this was a serious study. And let's just look what his results were. And it's perhaps a bit salutary to say that people died whilst they were medical students. So medical students think they have it bad these days. I point out that it was slightly worse in days gone by. Now, of course, we're not really interested in the great and the good, are we? We're much more interested in this group here, I think. Let's have a look at them in more detail. So what he said about those who failed entirely, well, they were quite a mixed bunch, and the only thing that pulled them together were that they were completely useless. He said that 15 of these were never able to pass exams due to idleness, listlessness, or basically stupidity, really. And I love the idea of listlessness. I want to go back and say to a student, you are listless. And 6 failed because of scandalous misconduct. Sadly, it doesn't go into more of what that is. And of course, these days, they would have had some YouTube video uploaded, wouldn't they, at this point. 10 were drunks, so they didn't come. And then because assessment then wasn't as good as it perhaps should be, it was just bad luck for 10 of them. So now, let's look at what happened to those people who failed. Well, the ones who left the profession, as you can see, most were men here, and I'll come back to the maleness of the medical profession shortly. I think that's a very interesting area we need to explore. 13 were left or expelled in disgrace. 3 were wisely removed by friends. It's always useful to have friends, then, I think, in this case, to look after you and probably patients as well. 3 became actors. 3 became homeopaths, but were useless at that as well. And then remember, this is Bart's in London, so too retired, too rich to need to work. So I think what I'm showing you there is things like misconduct, poor doctors are not new. Let's move then to current time, and for those of you who are a certain age, you'll recognise this is the original Dr. McCoy. Of course, we will accept no imitations at my age for people from Star Trek. And let's look at the delivery of healthcare then in the 21st century. I like this quote by Cyril Chandler. It said, "In the past, medicine was simple, safe, and largely ineffective. And now it's complex, it's effective, and of course it's highly dangerous." And I'm grateful to Ronald Harnden for this next slide. Basically, between 1750 and 1900, that's 150 years, knowledge in the world doubled. Between 1900 and 1950, that's only 50 years, knowledge doubled again. Between 1960 and 1965, something we'll see tonight, knowledge doubled in 5 years. And then in 2020, it's predicted that knowledge will double every 73 days. And if I was given this talk in 2030, then between us coming in and me talking to you and going out, knowledge will have doubled out. Now, of course, this is a flawed argument because what we're talking about here is information as opposed to knowledge. But you get the idea that actually the rate of expansion of medical knowledge is actually exponentially increasing. So it's difficult for doctors to keep up. And this slide just shows really what several people before me have said. If you look at the population of the world here, which are the blue bars, it's going up. But look at the population of doctors per 1,000 population, and it's more or less the same. So globally, we have a shortage of doctors. And as other people have shown you, actually it's even worse than that, because where we have the greatest need is usually where we have the least concentration of medical practitioners. And this again just is a pictorial representation of medical migration. And so this is medical migration to the US, the UK, Canada or Australia. And the bigger the actual circle, the more doctors are migrating from there to these countries. And you can see this really reiterates what Jim McKillop said this morning, that the Caribbean are actually sending an awful lot of doctors to other countries. But there's perhaps another few surprises there. For example, I don't know where Jerry is if he's here, but Ireland seems to be populating the world with Irish doctors, as far as I can see from this. But then again, it's an industry for you, so isn't it? So there we go. But it's not just about knowledge and skills, is it? It's about enculturation. When people come and work with you, they're usually coming to a very different culture, even if they're only coming across the Pennines, even if they're only coming between hospitals. The culture of different places is very different. Some years ago we did a study and we looked about the culture for the way that surgeons treated similar diseases, and it was different between different hospitals, it was different between different surgical teams, and it even seemed to differ depending on what side of the ward you were on. So the issues of enculturation cannot really be overstated, I don't think. This is really the problem that we're facing in the UK, and this is a headline from that bastion of middle-classness, the Daily Telegraph, about foreign doctors coming over here, taking our jobs, and actually being twice as likely to be incompetent as everyone else. Of course, this is a headline that sells papers, of course, but it's not specific to the UK. This is a paper from Canada, and you can see there are similar things there as well. And it's not just about statistics. It's not just about the numbers. It's actually what happens in real life. And this man is Dr. Daniel Urbani. I don't know him at all, I've never met him, but there's a very famous case within the UK. A number of doctors, Dr. Urbani was from South Africa, would come over to the UK at the weekend to do general practice on calls. And Dr. Urbani came over one weekend and administered an unfortunately lethal amount of morphine to a patient. I'm not saying that Dr. Urbani was an evil man, I don't think he was. I think he just found himself working in a very different culture, not used to maybe the way in which we prescribe, not used to perhaps the figures and so forth, but unfortunately a patient died. And this, and the subsequent court case, was very famous within the UK. So let's look on what we're doing in the UK to try and ensure that doctors are safe and patients are kept safe. I'm not suggesting for a moment that doctors come and actually don't care about being incompetent. We know that, for example, that being referred to the General Medical Council for anything increases the number of people who suffer mental health issues. And in fact, there was a survey that showed that the 25 doctors who had been reported to the GMC over a period of years had committed suicide. So this is a very serious thing. And we want to protect doctors from actually making mistakes, and also, of course, protect patients from being for having the resultant issues from medical mistakes. Now, of course, we are going through Brexit. Theresa May, our Prime Minister, on the 29th of March, invoked Clause 50, which means within the next 2 years that the UK, or at least part of it, will leave the European Union. And that has very profound implications for us in terms of medical manpower and also for professional regulation. And I'll allude to that as I go through things. So the regulation of doctors in the UK, as I'm sure many of you will know, is undertaken by the General Medical Council. And all doctors who work within the UK, whether they're actually working for the NHS or whether they're working in a private capacity, must be registered and more recently have a license to practice with the GMC to actually practice. And I'll talk about licensings to practice because since 2012 these are new. The reason we have the GMC really is actually to protect patients, of course, and to maintain standards for medical treatment and the practice of medicine itself. And these are the functions that the GMC within the UK undertakes. So it obviously registers all those graduates who have the appropriate primary medical qualification. It produces books and booklets on standards and invokes these. So we have Tomorrow's Doctors, we have Good Medical Practice and a number of others. It actually is involved in the education and regulating the education of medical practitioners, both undergraduate and postgraduate. And a few years ago, it became the organisation that oversaw the whole of medical training from when you came into to study an undergraduate degree to being a senior clinician like myself. And then, of course, the thing that it's known mostly for is fitness to practice. And if you look at where the budget goes for the General Medical Council, about 11% of the budget goes here, similar amounts here, and the rest of it is all in fitness to practice. So the GMC keeps alive the lawyer profession within the UK, I always think. So let's look at what quality assurance might look like. Well, the GMC has a process of assurance for all the quality of undergraduate or what's called basic medical education, and inspects all the medical schools in the UK. And many of my colleagues here from the UK will either have been inspectors or will have been inspected. And it's no mean feat. They come roughly every 5 years, and they come for approximately 5 days, which can be spread over a year. A large number of people come, including clinicians, students, junior doctors, educationalists, and lay people. So this is very serious. And up front, before that, you have to provide a large amount of documentation. From 2012, there's been a program of revalidation for all doctors, and this has meant that people like myself, who originally disqualified, and then that was meant to show that I kept up to date with 50 hours of CPD, that I was definitely up to date, and people took that on trust. That's all changed from 2012, and I will show you what revalidation means towards the end of this talk. What are the issues about new graduates? Transitioning to a new role is always challenging, of course. There are 34 medical schools last time I left, which is a week ago, and by the time I get back there may be more. We're now mushrooming private medical schools like we've never done before. And all of these have different assessment programs. They are all bound, of course, by Tomorrow's Doctors, so all the learning outcomes are within Tomorrow's Doctors, but the way in which we get there, the curriculum is different, and the assessment is different in different schools. How do we know then that a medical student graduating from Leeds is the equivalent of the medical student graduating in London or in Liverpool, etc.? And this has caused some consternation, and I'll talk about that in a moment. What the GMC have set up until now is this quality assurance across UK universities and medical schools will ensure that. And the other issue, of course, is about the English language ability from people from the European Economic Area. And as you will know, that with that until recently, within the EEA, there is free movement of individuals. And not only could we not assess people's basic medical competence, but we were not allowed to test their language abilities as well, which meant that we had the rather peculiar situation where people from Australia and Canada had to undertake language assessment, whereas people from, say, Poland didn't. So there was some rather paradoxical implications of this, but that's changed. We have a new national licensing assessment, which will come in 2022, and at the moment the GMC is consulting about this. I think it's fair to say that the implementation of this has provoked polarisation of views, and within this audience there will be people who have very different views about this. Again, it was really brought in to try and address this idea of making sure that everyone was at the same minimum standard. The registration requirements for the GMC are that within, as I said, the EEA, there's a mutual recognition of training and qualifications. So we can't test anyone again from the EEA at the moment. In 2 years' time, after Brexit, of course, that will change. And we don't know at the moment what that might look like. But, and so, as I've just said, really, people from the EEA are entitled to registration, to basic registration, and work by the GMC and work in the UK. So doctors outside the EEA need to demonstrate that they hold an acceptable primary medical qualification from a known university or medical school, that they have the prerequisite knowledge and skills, and I'll come back to how we test that in a moment, that they're in good standing, that there aren't any court cases against them, and that they have the necessary knowledge of English. And the English language testing is done through the IELTS system, which you'll be very well aware of, I'm sure. So not exempt are all international graduates outside the EEA, but no longer exempt because I think it's about 4 years ago now, it was decided that we needed to test the language abilities, not the medical qualifications, but the language abilities from everyone within the EEA, so that was new, and also that includes Swiss nationals as well. We test the professional abilities, that's the knowledge and the skills of people outside the European Union using the PLAB exam, and many of you will know about the PLAB exam, and some of you who may have worked within the UK will have taken this exam. It consists really of two parts after you've got the English out of the way, and the first part is a computer-based examination with 200 SBAs, and these include pictures, images, X-rays and ECGs and so forth. And then in part two is the usual OSCE, and that takes the form of 14 clinical stations. This is a picture to show you UK postgraduate training. So this is someone who's graduating from the university, and of course after 2022 there will be the MLA here at this point. And then of course this shows you really for physicians, because here within your foundation year, you're now, or foundation 2 years, you're eligible to take the MRCP UK. And by the end of core training, you're expected, or the middle of core training, you're expected to have passed part 1, and then by the end of core training, that's CT1 or CT2, you're expected to have got the full diploma from the Royal Colleges of Physicians. Going on into your specialty areas, you'll then take the specialty certificate for the discipline that you're in, and then come out as a specialist with a certificate of completion of training, and then you come on to a consultant appointment. And up until 2012, you were never tested again at this point. Your ability to work in your chosen discipline was never tested again, and you were only expected to keep up to date with your continued professional development. If we look at the number of doctors in the UK, you can see there's just over 250,000 doctors on the register. And of those, since 2012, just under 250,000 have a license to practice now, which means that they can practice medicine within the UK. And if you look at the 4 largest specialty groups by primary medical qualification, You can see perhaps where doctors from overseas, both from Europe and further afield, are working. And if you look at psychiatry here, and there's a number of people who are working in psychiatry, you can see that the vast majority of those people are not trained in the UK. And I think this has large implications for us able to be self-sufficient in psychiatrists in 2 years' time. Now let's just look at a bit of data from fitness to practice, and it gives a bit more details to what Jim was talking about this morning. So this is data from 2014. So this was the number of doctors in practice on the register at that time, and there were just under 9,000 complaints. Within those complaints, there are a number which are not for the GMC, so it might be the food when I was under the care of Dr. X was pretty grim, and that's obviously not the fault of Dr. X. And so another 593 went off to the employer, and those can be things like the ambulance didn't pick me up for my appointment, and so forth and so on. But if we look at the ones that the GMC actually took for investigations, you can see here that of the nearly 3,000 cases that the GMC investigated, there were 319, just over 300 investigations. And this was the range of sanctions that you can see happen. This doesn't all add up because some of these are still ongoing, surprisingly. Now, actually, that's not what people remember. What people remember is this, that in this year, 22 people were erased from the register or suspended. That's only 0.01%. But those are the people that the public remember. It's a tiny fraction of those who are actually practicing. But if you get out of the train at Euston, as I used to do when I was working for the GMC, and get in a taxi and say, take me to the GMC, they'll say, the taxi driver will say, oh, that's that group that smacked naughty doctors, isn't it? Is that what you're there for? No, I'm working for them. It's nothing to do with me. So that's what people remember. And these people do untold harm to the medical profession in general, and obviously to patients. If we look at why people are referred, or who's referred to the GMC, well, let's look at the data here. 70 to 85% male, 49% of the doctors referred are over 50, and of those poor communication cases, 77% are about men. Now, if I come back to men, as I promised, you could say that if we retired all men who practice medicine over the age of 50, we would, at a stroke, solve all our problems. You could say that, I couldn't possibly comment. But of those, a bigger proportion are non-UK graduates. The 44% is outside the EEA, and 22% are within, are those coming from the European area. And so you can see the more complaints are from those doctors who do not qualify within the UK. This does not mean to say that these are bad doctors. I think that a large amount of what we're seeing, and what was referred to earlier on, is about enculturation, particularly those data about communication. So let's look at what regulation of doctors is across Europe. I've told you about in detail what happens in the UK. Well, quality assurance of medical education is shared, really. In some countries there are medical councils, but in others it's local authorities and ministries. And it can be ministries of education as well as ministries of health. And regulation is often decentralised down to regions. And revalidation, that's the recertification of senior doctors, is at very different stages, and I'll come back to this. If we look at regulation outside Europe, you might think, oh, we're quite smug, of course, in Europe, that we're doing things very well. Well, actually, that's not so. In other parts of the world, they're doing things equally as well, if not better. And then this RAND report, which was commissioned by the GMC, when they looked at these countries here, what they found was that their registration is mandatory, that all these countries have a code of ethics, and they all have fitness to practice processes, and they have core requirements set out for registration, and that in Nigeria there is compulsory CPD, or your license to practice medicine in that country is not renewed. And in India, some parts, you have to reapply for registration but it's usually administrative issue only. Now, I promised to just talk about revalidation. And so to work now in the UK as a doctor, not only do you need to have a registrable primary medical qualification, that's your MBBS or your MBCHB and so forth, but you also need to have a license to practice. So a license to practice really is you have to demonstrate that on an ongoing basis that you are keeping up to date and are fit to practice in your chosen field. And so if you are a neonatologist, you do not need to show that you are fit to practice in paediatrics, but you need to show that you're fit to practice in neonatology. This is in contrast to the United States, and we may talk about that in questions. And the license to practice is not merely recognition that at some time many years ago you passed your final exams, but it's an indicator that you are keeping professionally up to date and obeying the standards and the rules set by the GMC and the specialist organisations and medical royal colleges and faculties in which you practice. So in the UK, licence says to practice will need periodic revalidation. So every 5 years now, I have to revalidate as a clinical immunologist and allergist. And if I don't, then I'm not able to practice in my speciality in the UK. So how does it work? What does revalidation and what does getting a license to practice look like? It means that I have to have an annual appraisal. And these appraisals are not just a sitting down tick box process. It's an in-depth process, and I'll show you that in a moment. After 5 annual appraisals that have been satisfactory, that's then reported to someone within my organisation, so within the hospital environment in which I work, who's called a responsible officer, who makes a recommendation to the GMC that I am revalidated. If there are issues with my practice, then it might be that I am not revalidated for 5 years, I may be revalidated for 1 year, or I may be validated for 3 years. But the maximum I can be revalidated is 5 years. And then within that 5 years, of course, I've got to have annual appraisals again. And the appraisal thing for Leeds looks like this. This is my online appraisal, and I have to put all my details in and so forth. It looks very much like this. This was the last but one I did. And I have to upload evidence that I'm keeping up to date in these areas. And so you can see the evidence will look like these. I upload certain items and so forth, and this is gone through in detail at my appraisal. And it's got to be satisfactory to convince people that I'm keeping up to date in those areas. What about the rest of Europe? And you can see the rest of the world now are looking at this, and certainly other areas are looking at revalidation. Well, in the rest of Europe, it's like this. So you can see it's very different. And I think this will be a changing event. So in summary then, I've shown you that currently, while we're in the European Union, there is free movement of doctors across the EEA and mutual recognition of qualifications, but we now have language testing. Other international medical graduates take a language test and the PLAB test. The medical licensing exam is to be introduced in 2022, and what that will look like, we're not quite certain yet. But that all doctors now, all senior doctors working within the UK are requested to have a license to practice. And to get a license to practice, you have to be revalidated. What will the future look like? You remember this picture here of Miller's Pyramid, and you can remember, we all talk about OSCEs, and Ronald has spent his whole life going around the world talking about a thing he invented years ago. Well, he better keep going because I think it's going to be finishing any time soon. If I take what the students have been showing you, I think that technology is going to change what we do in the future. And we'll be able to do things in a much more interesting way. So, in Leeds we're looking at PIT, which is personalised immersive testing, which is putting people into virtual reality or augmented reality situations to test how they might work together. And of course you can not only do this for an individual doctor, you can do it for a team, of course, as well. And this is extremely exciting. And then the second thing which I've been looking at, and in the future I may well talk about, is the extended brain. So does your brain end at skull and skin, or is your brain what's in here and what's in here? If you have a mobile phone, which I'll bet the vast majority of you do, you have the whole of human knowledge since civilization began, or the access to it here. So why are we still testing what you can retain in here? So going forward, instead of actually taking students' phones off them when they go into exams, we'll be making sure they take them into assessments. So, thank you very much for listening. The future is exciting, it's going to be different, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Roberts. The floor is now open for questions, comments, or sharing of ideas.
Thank you for your talk. Just want to ask, as a classification, like for me, I graduated from UK, but I am not an EEA or a British citizen. So what are my options if I decided to come to the UK?
Sorry, what are your options if you want to come to the UK?
Yeah, because that is for the one who are not graduated from the UK. But because I was in the UK during my foundation years, and unfortunately have to go back to the tier 1, tier 5 issues, the EA.
Sure.
So just wonder if anything changed now.
I think it's only going to get better for you. We're short of doctors already. We're bringing in another 1,500 medical students, but that's going to take 10 years before it makes any difference to the workforce. And in the meantime, European doctors will stop coming. And of course, we're a net importer of European doctors. So I think that doctors who come from a further away than the European Union are going to be even more welcome than you have been previously.
So how will be the revalidation with them?
Again, what you will need to do is to start with the annual appraisals. And you'll be appraised, no, when you go into the UK, you will start to be having annual appraisals. And even if you start as a locum, everybody will be having annual appraisals with someone.
Thanks.
I feel like I'm a recruiting agency. Come into the UK, we need you.
Thanks, Rudy, for that presentation. I have a question about the complaints that patients make about doctors trained overseas. So you suggested that part of it is to do with cultural or enculturation. I wonder also whether it is to do with how receptive people are to being cared for by somebody from a different culture. I mean, bordering on racism, perhaps.
Yeah, and of course, Jim touched on this morning. I mean, you know, I think when you work as a doctor, you live in a sort of rather bubble where people are not racist or sexist. Whereas if you look at the general population, I think things are very different. But I think that when the GMC receive a complaint, it's not automatically investigated, as you can see. There are investigating officers which look very carefully at this, so they're trying to triangulate information on a person. So one person saying, I didn't like the way this doctor spoke to me, would not trigger a whole investigation. It might trigger a note back to the employer to perhaps have a word with someone. And if you have any complaints at all, that comes up in your annual appraisal, and you've got to actually answer why that complaint occurred and what you did about it. So I think it's much more likely to be about expectations. I don't think that we actually have as good induction for overseas doctors who are coming to work with us as we should have. Things are beginning to change, as Jim pointed out this morning about having an online induction that the GMC put on. But I think that employers have a responsibility to work with new doctors, whether they're senior doctors or junior doctors, to help them at this critically intense learning time when you transition between countries, between continents. And I think at this moment in time, I think we could do a lot more than we're doing.
Hello, Roseanne from Year 1, hang on. I'm just wondering about the difference between the GMC licensing and your college CPD or CME. is there going to be a change? Because I know that there is a college CME that is mandatory.
Yeah.
Does this mean now that you are doing two things, or is the GMC going to allow
No,
the college?
The CPD is taken from the colleges. What happened was that, and it's extremely complicated and very political, but previously the GMC looked at undergraduate issues and then just fitness to practice. They weren't really involved in trainees or in continued professional development. That was the responsibility of the colleges. The government decided that the colleges then were not doing this as well as they should, and set up what was called PMETB, Postgraduate Training Medical Education Board, and which was a political organisation and actually reported to Parliament, did not report to the GMC. That meant that the colleges were emasculated, and that was always thought to be politically the reason for doing that. And then what happened was, because the government decided it was too expensive, and also, of course, they were then accountable for postgraduate training, which they didn't want to be, they allowed the GMC to absorb the PMETB. So that's why GMC now are actually, they are responsible for all the training, and the colleges have to actually answer to the GMC. So all the colleges had to produce core curricula, and that was for postgraduate training, and those curricula were approved by the GMC, which was the first time that had ever happened. And in fact, that was the first time that the colleges had ever produced curricula. I remember when I took my membership, and I said to my consultant, what do I need to learn? What do I need to learn for this membership exam? And he said to me, you need to learn medicine, Dr. Roberts. Just medicine. Well, of course, oh, that was a surprise then. So it's a political thing. And so the colleges report to the GMC.
Judy, if I can add on one question. Here, to your left. You have a policy for patient safety. On the same breath, do you have a policy for safety of health professional?
Well, that's a very good question, actually. And I think we don't particularly, but individual trusts or individual primary care establishments have policies on their walls saying that their staff, have the right not to be abused, and if people abuse their staff, then they will be asked to leave and so forth. So that's one thing. But what's now, and you'll have seen this yourselves, but certainly in the Lancet this week and in JAMA last week, there's huge amounts of work now being done on physician burnout. So I think it's about protecting doctors from overwork and burnout, and that's going to be the next big thing. And I don't think it's easy, and I think it's a real problem for the future.
Thank you. The lady over there.
Hi, thanks very much. Yeah. Thanks very much for your interesting talk. I'm Lakshmi from Monash, Malaysia. I have a question on the appraisal. You said 5 times a year?
No, 5 years.
Sorry.
Your revalidation, you have to have 5 annual appraisals to be
5
revalidated.
annual, so that's
Yes.
once a year.
Yes, just once a year.
Are they online?
Because it is 5 times
Online,
a year.
they'd be really busy. Busy
Sorry?
doctors. I thought it'd be very difficult to see doctors. Yeah.
No, exactly. No.
So is that online and
No,
face to face?
Face to face.
Face to face.
Yes, and if you're an academic like I am, that's your clinical appraiser. It's usually your clinical director of the discipline you're in, and the dean or your lead for your research area.
So you'd have to, so depending on your
Joint,
appointment,
yeah.
your
For
joint,
clinical academics, it's a joint appraisal, but it's face to face and is at least an hour, sometimes 2. So it's a serious thing, and you've uploaded everything beforehand.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we thank Professor Roberts for excellent presentation.